Everyone loves something new to play with.
It's only a toy.
No, it's not.
The new Fujifilm X-H1 is out, and there'll be a bundle of reviews online about this camera, I'm sure. So I want to do something a bit different. I want to see just how good the film simulation Eterna is, how far you can push and pull it in post-production, and test out this onboard F-Log function. First up, let's take a quick hike through some of the film menu options new to the X-H1. Last year I suggested the X-T2 could possibly be one of the best small video cameras out there. Ease of use, lightness, small box, packed with 4K, a quick blast through some of the options to record on this new camera, and you can see Fujifilm have taken a massive size 12 chuck boot step forward again. 4K up to 30 frames a second and 200 megabits a second. There's Cinema 4K at 24p and 1080. You can record up to 120 frames per second for super slow-mo results, and most of this film's recorded in that mode, if only for artistic license. But why is 200 megabits per second so important? Megabits per second refers to the amount of data required to encode a second of video. Bitrate affects file size and quality. Higher the bitrate, better the quality, your trade-off being massive file size. Consider that once upon a time 100 megabits per second was considered perfectly adequate and maybe even excessive for broadcast, and you'll understand that 200 as a number is in Spinal Tap terms like going to 11. Now, I'm not a pixel peeper. I do lose the will to live watching highly technical reviews, but I know this is a massive leap forward, and with it, the X-H1 is the first Fujifilm camera to record F-Log internally to an SD card. Now, F-Log is a big deal. It allows you to record a flatter image with a wider dynamic range than standard picture profiles, and this is where dynamic range is important too. There's a new 400% dynamic range setting to bring total dynamic range to 12 stops. Let's go grade something. Eterna film simulation is new to the Fujifilm mirrorless lineup. It emulates famous Fujifilm film stock, low saturation, low contrast, soft shadows. It's really made, I think, for video shooters on this camera because it's slightly flatter in these departments. It grades well, unless of course you want this less saturated look, in which case leave as is. So I've moved over now to the computer. I'm going to color grade using Eterna just on one picture here on the booster shot that I took at the end of Brighton Pier. I've never really been one for fast rides, so looking at this thing going round, it's in slow motion, I promise you. When it was at full motion, this thing was belting round. Anyway, we're going to do some basic corrections, so I'm not going to get too tied up on the HSL secondary or color wheels, but I am going to move down the list. We'll start with input LUT, nothing going on there. I'm not going to add a LUT in. I'm going to do it all on the fly from the start here. White balance, I'm going to try and find something that's pleasing to the eye. This is often the way that I start white balance. I'm choosing the white on the number 2 booster sign here. It's color corrected to a degree, very subtle degree. I'm not even sure if you've seen that, but it has happened. Temperature wise, I'm warming up very slightly, but not too much. I'm going to come to the yellows and the warmer colors in just a moment. Tint, not bothering with. Exposure, up just a tad. Contrast, this is where I like to start making a difference. We're using an Eterna film simulation. It's brand new for Fujifilm video cameras. And so therefore I'm breathing just a little bit more contrast in here because it's a flatter film simulation. Highlights, slightly, shadows, bringing up very slightly, blacks, so I'm bringing down the blacks. Now you can really start to see some boost going into booster. Saturation I'm not worrying about. Creative. So faded film would be a complete waste of time. We're not trying to reintroduce fade here. I'm happy with the way it is. Sharpen, I don't often sharpen unless I really need to, but I'll add a touch in here just for the sake of it. Vibrance, just a slight amount. Saturation, I'm not going to touch. Neither am I going to touch the tint balance. Moving on to curves. Very, very slight S. Very slight. Hardly anything at all. Now this hue saturation wheel is quite an interesting one, and I don't see it used too much. I'm using Premiere Pro's Lumetri color here. You can either pull out using the pen tool. Look what happens to the yellow. If I choose the yellow area, that's going to bring out some yellow here. In fact, quite a lot of yellow with not much movement. There's some blue in the sky, and there's certainly some blue around the chair. So if I drag the blue, you'll see that does nothing to the yellow, of course, but it is beginning to make the blues a little bit more intense. Now, if you want to fine-tune that, you can click into the wheel and you can move around a little bit more subtly at either end of the darker or brighter end of the spectrum. So there we are, hue, saturation curves done. Color wheels, as I say, I'm not going to touch that. I'm going to go back to basic correction, and I think I'm quite happy with that as a starting point, or maybe even a finishing point. If you don't want to over color or overgrade your pictures and you're using Eterna for that reason that it's slightly flatter, then this might be as far as you actually want to go.
So let's talk about log files and why having the ability to record F-Log internally instead of strapping the camera to an external recorder is such a big deal. Here is some straight out the camera, no tweaking honest governor, raw as wind whipping through a cold siding on a midwinter's day F-Log footage. The whole point of using cameras like Fujifilm's X-H1 for me is size. It's larger than the X-T2 for sure, but not much. You certainly wouldn't want to be gaff taping another unit on top. I thought we'd give the F-Log a real run for its money and go inside low light, just as light was failing for the evening in an old Loco engine shed lit mainly by a forge and sodium lighting. Now log files are less saturated, less contrasty, but if you want lots more dynamic range in your footage where you can make the most of what lurks in the shadows or push the colors in different directions, then log gifts you far more options. One thing to bear in mind when you shoot log, and this is important, is not to underexpose. Log is giving you shadow back, so there's as much info as possible. If you don't need that info, you can drop those shadows back in the mix for sure, but generally, think about shooting slightly more to the right of your exposure compensation. Otherwise, you could add some more noise into your shots than you really want. You can see by these shots I've slightly underexposed, so we've got some work at the computer to do now.
Actually, funnily enough, sitting here at the computer, very similar workflow to the Eterna grading. White balance, temperature, tint tweak if necessary, up with exposure slightly, not so liberal with a contrast pump, and rolling down on the slider in the blacks. A little bit of work in curves, but for a quick and easy grade, I'm pretty happy with this.
There's a part of me that feels we've only just got started on this. It was always designed to be just a quick overview of log and a new film simulation filter. But in quick recap, ticks and crosses for me, inclusion of log internally gets a big tick. New frame rates for slow motion, tick. Dynamic range improvements, another tick. Actually a double tick. Ease of grading, and we didn't actually get too complex at all here, tick. Size of camera, tick. It's fair to say I love filming already with my X-T2, but will the features I've shared and some that I haven't, such as in-body stabilization, make me rush out and buy one? Well, that's a different kind of tick. Let me share some more quick before and afters and you can make your own mind up. If you like the video, why not subscribe for more films about kit and people and how-tos. Till next time.
Back in the day